In August, police in Vietnam uncovered an infant trafficking ring which had purchased and resold at least 16 infants aged between 3 days and 3 months. A subsequent raid on a document forgery group which produced the fake birth certificates and other documents led investigators to identify a total of 84 cases of suspected infant trafficking across 32 Vietnamese provinces and cities. For more than 2 decades, Vietnam has been a source, destination, and transit country for human trafficking, with a current score of 7 out of 10 in the Global Organized Crime Index. Between 2014 and 2023, Vietnam detected and investigated approximately 2,400 human trafficking cases. In the first half of 2024 alone, 35 cases involving 103 victims have been registered. According to the OC Index, criminals are increasingly professional and form closed networks involving local recruitment agencies and foreign actors, such as Chinese and Korean bride recruitment brokers. This means Vietnamese women and girls often end up in the regional and global sex industries. Criminal actors also include family members and acquaintances of victims, as criminals specifically target ethnic minorities and families from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. In the baby trafficking cases, police found that the criminals used social media to find and contact women who are struggling to provide for their children. Vietnamese victims of human trafficking are entitled to travel funds and essential needs. Yet the country's score for victim and witness support is only at 4.5 out of 10. Organizations that provide victim support are often short-staffed and poorly funded, and these non-state actors in Vietnam score just 1.5 out of 10. Globally, only 9 other countries scored lower on this form of resilience. With me to discuss human trafficking in Vietnam is Dr. Hai Thanh Luong, lecturer in criminology at Griffith University and a member of the GI network. Hi, welcome to the Index. Now, can you tell us what are the dynamics and drivers of human trafficking in Vietnam, and are there any differences compared to other countries in Southeastern Asia?
Well, a couple of things I want to highlight. Firstly, regarding to economic hardship. As you may know, population in Vietnam over 100 million. A lot of the vulnerable groups, including minor group in the northern, most of them living in the remote area. They are very hardship economic. That's why so many victims in Vietnam, they come from impoverished rural areas where economic opportunity is very scarce. For example, ethnic minorities, women from the northern provinces are often lured by promise of well-being jobs in the urban center abroad. The second point regarding to drivers for human trafficking in Vietnam, it is a migration. As you may know, it's a lot of flow of the migration in Vietnam, looking for around their neighborhoods countries like China, or even those Southeast Asia developed countries like the Philippines or Singapore, and also in Europe particularly. Cross-border trafficking is a significant issue. Vietnamese women and girls are frequently trafficked to China for forced marriage, like you sharing when we start. A notable case involving a trafficking ring that explored over 100 women from the Vietnam northern province, selling them as a bride in China. The number 3 drivers, I think, regarding to education and awareness. After year by year, now the Vietnamese government they improve the policy and framework regarding to legal to improve education and awareness. However, that is not enough. Particularly with the rural area or remote area, most of them very hard to catch up with the updates from the government or agency regarding to human trafficking. That's why they absolutely become a potential target of the human trafficking rings. And number 4, I think regarding to ethnic minorities and their practice culture, where they're quite poor, such as in the Hermons or Yao, where are living in the northern province share border with China, particularly really vulnerable compared to the rest of the king, who is a majority red in the Vietnam. A study highlight in our research now, we look for and we found out traffickers often target this group because their minority status and limits access to resources. Last but not least, I think it's a quite blur between the trafficking and smuggling. That's why sometimes in the first state, they are that only look for is opportunity to move on another country to look for the opportunity to job. But unfortunately, after that, they become as a victim of traffic.
Thanks so much for that comprehensive answer, Hai. Actually, I have a follow-up question in the sense of, obviously COVID-19 had a massive impact, not just on our lives, but also on organized criminal networks. Did that have any impact at all on human trafficking in Vietnam? And if so, how?
Firstly, is economic vulnerability. The impact in the pandemic led to the widespread job losses, right? Particularly in formal sector. For example, many women from the rural areas in the Vietnam who lost their jobs because of COVID impact was trafficked into forced labor in the urban center and another way. A recent report by the International Organization for Migration, IOM, they also highlighted that economic suppression made individuals more susceptible to traffickers for the promise of employment. In the Vietnam, they call and they advertising in the social media, it's a simple job, high salary. The second point, it is a shift in trafficking patterns. With the international border closed when the COVID occurred, there was a noticeable shift towards domestic trafficking. Traffickers very quick adopted by exploiting victims within the country only. For example, there was increasing in the forced labor in the local factory or the construction, etc., as well as the sexual exploiting in the urban area. Number 3, impact from the COVID-19. Of course, the same another country in Southeast Asia. It is online exploitation. The increasing use of the internet during the lockdowns provide the traffickers with a new opportunity to exploit the victims. It's really booming and exploitation with the traffickers. They use social media like Facebook and Zalo and online job portals to lure victims. Number 4, I think delayed support service also is impacted by the COVID-19 regarding to human trafficking in the Vietnam. The pandemic disrupted support service for trafficking victims. Last but not least, increasingly vulnerable of the migrant workers. Many were stranded without work or support, making them easy targets for their traffic.
Thanks, Hai. Let's talk about the measures to combat this now. So the Vietnamese government claims to prioritize combating human trafficking, right? But the 2023 OC Index assessment found that it didn't comply with the minimum international standards to fight this crime. Has the situation improved since then?
2024, this year, the Vietnamese government made significant amendments to the 2011 anti-human trafficking law. That is very good. These amendments including a lot of things, enhancing victim protection measures and also increase penalties for traffickers. There has been a notable increase in the number of prosecution and convictions for the human trafficking offenses. For example, in this year, 2024, Vietnamese authority prosecute 150 trafficking cases in the Vietnam, resulting with around 120 convictions. It's a very significant increase from the previous year. If we compare, this increase is attributed to improved training for law enforcement agency as well on handling with the trafficking case, as well as enhancing inter-agency coordination. Another thing, I think financial assistance and job placement is a very good and very positive voice supports the victim. For example, for job placement services, the government now collaborate with the local business to provide job opportunity for survivors. I mean, for the trafficking returnees. This includes job fairs and partnerships with the company willing to hire trafficking survivors when they come back to Vietnam. And also they enhance training for service providers. For example, the trauma-informed care or victim identification, etc. And particularly with the international cooperation to support. Now the Vietnam has strengthened its cooperation with a lot with international organizations to improve victim support. Last but not least, I think compare last year when OC Index released this year, the public awareness campaign in the Vietnam now is improved. The government has increased efforts to raise public awareness about human trafficking. For example, a nationwide campaign was launched, including the TV channel, radio ads, social media outreach, and community workshop, etc. These efforts indicate that while challenges still remain for human trafficking, there has been significant improvements in the Vietnam to combating human trafficking compared last year.
I actually want to follow up with you around the victim support because, in the introduction, we mentioned that the organizations providing this are often underfunded, but it does seem like there's been improvements and that is changing.
Organizations providing victim support in the Vietnam often face significant challenges due to because underfunding. Many non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and government-run sectors struggle with limited financial resources. I can show here two main things. Firstly, operation constraints, because the very limited budget and also constraints as well. Many sectors cannot operate at the full capacity. For example, a shelter in Hanoi reported that it could only accommodate around maximum 50% of its intended capacity because insufficient funds. The second one is staff issue. Underfunding leads to the staffing shortage, which impacting to the quality of care provided to the victims, unfortunately. Many sectors rely on volunteers or part-time or casual job, which can affect the consistency and quality of the support service. Two main things we can see that when you're underfunded, firstly, medical and psychology care. Of course, with limited funding means that many shelters cannot provide perfect medical and psychology care for our victims. For example, again, with recent report from the Hanoi highlighted some sectors lack the resources to offer specialized trauma consulting, which is crucial for the recovery of trafficking victims. The second one, legal assistance. Providing legal aid to trafficking victims is very essential for their protection and reintegration, particularly with the cross-border traffic victims who are now quite lucky to have to come back to their country. But unfortunately, without the financial support regarding to legal assistance, many organizations struggle to offer comprehensive legal support because of financial constraints. So number three, regarding to underfunding in the Vietnam in terms of human trafficking, it is a reliance on international aid. Many victims were support organizations in the Vietnam. They really heavy rely on international aid and donations to sustain their operation.
Okay, so last question, Hai. Looking forward, do you see current efforts by the government and law enforcement as being on the right track to curb human trafficking, or do you think more needs to be done?
I think the current efforts by the Vietnamese government and law enforcement that is on the right track, as I mentioned, and showing significant progress in combating human trafficking. But so far, however, to achieve sustainable and long-term success, it is essential to address the area needing improvement, as I mentioned. Continue commitment, increasing funding, enhancing collaboration at all levels will be the key point to effectively curbing human trafficking in the Vietnam so far.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Index, and a special thank you to Hai for being part of the discussion. Now, if you want to learn more about criminality and resilience in Vietnam, just head over to the website of the Global Organized Crime Index, ocindex.net.